Lady Margaret Whitmore adjusted her white gloves as she stepped into the dusty auction house on the outskirts of London. The elderly woman had spent 40 years serving as the Queen's personal secretary, and even in retirement, she maintained the same precise habits that had made her invaluable to the royal household. The auction house smelled of old wood and forgotten memories. Margaret wasn't looking for anything particular that autumn morning. She simply enjoyed browsing through the remnants of other people's lives, searching for hidden treasures among the ordinary items that families no longer wanted. As she wandered through the preview room, her eyes fell upon a small velvet jewelry box sitting unremarkably on a table filled with costume jewelry and trinkets. Something about its deep purple color and ornate silver clasp made her pause. She picked it up carefully, feeling its surprising weight in her hands. When Margaret opened the box, her breath caught in her throat. Inside, nestled against faded silk lining, lay a magnificent sapphire brooch surrounded by diamonds. But it wasn't just any brooch. She recognized it immediately from the countless times she had helped the Queen prepare for state occasions. This was the Cambridge sapphire, one of the most precious pieces in the royal collection. Her hands trembling slightly, Margaret looked more closely at the other items in the box. There was a delicate pearl necklace that she remembered seeing in official portraits, and a pair of emerald earrings that had been gifts from foreign dignitaries. Each piece was unmistakably royal, unmistakably priceless. The auction house clerk noticed her interest and approached with a friendly smile. "Beautiful pieces, aren't they? They came from an estate sale last month. The family said they'd been in storage for decades. Starting bid is only £500 for the whole lot." Margaret's mind raced. £500 for jewelry worth millions? How had these irreplaceable royal heirlooms ended up in a common auction house? More importantly, how had they left the royal collection without anyone noticing? She examined the auction catalog entry, which listed the items as various vintage jewelry pieces, provenance unknown. The selling party was listed simply as estate of E. Morrison, deceased. Margaret had no choice but to bid on the collection. She couldn't let these precious royal artifacts disappear into private hands, possibly forever. When the bidding began that afternoon, she found herself competing against only two other buyers who clearly had no idea what they were looking at. She won the entire collection for £800. That evening, in the privacy of her cottage, Margaret spread the jewelry across her dining table under a bright lamp. Every piece confirmed her worst fears. These weren't replicas or similar-looking items. These were genuine royal heirlooms, each one she could remember from her years of service. But how? The royal collection was carefully catalogued and regularly audited. Each piece had detailed records of when it was worn, by whom, and for what occasion. The security around these items was extraordinary. Margaret picked up the Cambridge sapphire again, turning it over in her hands. On the back of the brooch, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Tiny initials were engraved in the gold setting. EM 1953. EM the same initials as the estate sale. And 1953 was the year of the Queen's coronation. Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. She had stumbled onto something much bigger than missing jewelry. These initials suggested that someone with access to the royal collection had been marking pieces, possibly for decades. She thought about the E. Morrison whose estate had sold these items. Who was this person? How had they acquired royal jewelry? And most troubling of all, how many other pieces might be missing from the collection? Margaret knew she had to contact the palace immediately, but she also realized that this discovery could shake the very foundations of the monarchy. If royal heirlooms had been systematically stolen over the years, it would suggest a security breach at the highest levels of the royal household. As she carefully returned each piece to the velvet box, Margaret wondered if she was holding evidence of the greatest theft in royal history. The weight of her discovery felt heavier than the precious stones themselves. She reached for her phone to call the palace, then hesitated. Once she made this call, there would be no going back. The investigation that would follow might uncover secrets that had been buried for 70 years. But she had sworn an oath of loyalty to the crown, and that oath hadn't ended with her retirement. Whatever the consequences, the Queen deserved to know that her most precious heirlooms had been living a secret life outside the palace walls. Margaret dialed the number she still knew by heart, the direct line to the current royal secretary. As the phone rang, she looked once more at the beautiful, mysterious jewelry scattered across her table. Tomorrow, She would hand over these treasures and set in motion an investigation that would change everything the royal family thought they knew about their own collection. Tonight, she was perhaps the only person outside the palace who knew that the crown's most guarded secrets were no longer safe. The phone continued to ring, and Margaret prepared to deliver news that would shatter the carefully maintained order of the royal household forever. Sir James Hartwell, the current royal secretary, arrived at Margaret's cottage before dawn. He had driven through the night after receiving her extraordinary phone call, bringing with him the palace's head of security and a discreet team of experts. Margaret served tea in her best china as the men examined each piece of jewelry with magnifying glasses and specialized equipment. The silence in the small sitting room grew heavy as each expert confirmed what Margaret already knew. These were genuine royal heirlooms. "Lady Whitmore," Sir James said finally, his voice tight with concern, "you understand the gravity of what you've discovered. We need to know everything about how you acquired these items." Margaret recounted her morning at the auction house, providing every detail she could remember about the clerk, the other bidders, and the catalog listing. Sir James took careful notes while the security chief made phone calls to trace the auction house's records. "The initials on the Cambridge sapphire," Margaret said, pointing to the tiny engraving. "EM 1953. This suggests someone was marking pieces from the very beginning of Her Majesty's reign." The head of security, Commander Phillips, looked up from his phone. "I've contacted the auction house. They're cooperating fully. The Morrison estate sale was handled by a probate lawyer in Surrey. Apparently Ellen Morrison died 3 months ago at age 91. She had no family and her belongings were sold to settle debts." Sir James frowned. "Ellen Morrison. That name doesn't appear in any of our employee records from the 1950s. But someone with those initials clearly had access to the crown jewels during the coronation period." Margaret poured more tea, her hand steadier now that she had shared her burden. "In my 40 years at the palace, I never heard of any missing jewelry. The inventories were always perfect. How is that possible?" "That's what we need to find out," Sir James replied. "Commander Phillips, I want a complete audit of the royal collection. Every piece needs to be physically verified against the official records. And I want a full background investigation on this Ellen Morrison." Over the next several hours, the cottage became an impromptu investigation headquarters. The team photographed each piece of jewelry, documented the mysterious initials, and began cross-referencing the items with historical records. Margaret remembered something important. "The Queen Mother's private collection," she said suddenly. "In the 1950s, there was some confusion about which pieces belonged to the official crown collection and which were her personal property. Could these have been removed during that period?" Sir James looked intrigued. "You're thinking someone took advantage of the reorganization to remove pieces?" "It's possible. There were several months when jewelry was being moved between different storage locations. The cataloging system wasn't as sophisticated as it is today." Commander Phillips received another phone call and stepped outside to take it. When he returned, his expression was grim. "I've located Ellen Morrison's address. She lived in a modest flat in Surrey, apparently on a small pension. But here's what's interesting. According to her neighbors, she occasionally wore very expensive jewelry to special occasions. They assumed it was inherited from wealthy relatives. The implications were staggering. Ellen Morrison had been living with stolen royal jewelry for decades, possibly wearing priceless crown jewels to local events and dinner parties. The audacity of it was almost unbelievable. "We need to search her former residence," Sir James declared. "If she had these pieces, there might be others." Margaret watched the men preparing to leave and felt a strange mix of pride and dread. She had done her duty by reporting the discovery, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were opening a door that had been deliberately kept closed. "Sir James," she said as he gathered his papers, "what if this Ellen Morrison wasn't acting alone? What if someone at the palace helped her?" The royal secretary paused, his face pale. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of, Lady Whitmore. If these thefts happened during the 1950s, many of the people involved might still be alive. Some might even still be working at the palace." Commander Phillips checked his watch. "The probate lawyer is meeting us at Morrison's flat this afternoon. We should also interview the auction house staff and anyone else who handled these items." As the team prepared to leave, Margaret carefully packed the jewelry back into its velvet box. "Will you tell Her Majesty immediately?" Sir James hesitated. Not until we know more. If word of this gets out before we understand the full scope, it could cause a scandal that rocks the monarchy. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Margaret nodded, understanding the delicate position they were all in. And if there are more missing pieces? Then we'll need to decide whether the truth is more important than protecting the crown's reputation, Sir James replied quietly. After the men left, Margaret sat alone in her cottage, staring at the empty space on her dining table where the royal heirlooms had spent the night. She had served the royal family faithfully for 4 decades, but now she wondered how many secrets the palace walls had hidden. The discovery of the jewelry was just the beginning. Somewhere out there, Ellen Morrison's story was waiting to be uncovered, and Margaret suspected that when the full truth emerged, it would reveal betrayals and deceptions that reached into the very heart of the royal household. She made herself another cup of tea and settled into her armchair, knowing that her quiet retirement had just come to an end. Whether she liked it or not, she was now part of an investigation that could change the monarchy forever. The phone rang again, and Margaret wasn't surprised to see Sir James's number on the display. The hunt for answers was just beginning. Ellen Morrison's flat was a time capsule frozen in the 1950s. Floral wallpaper, doilies on every surface, and photographs of royal events spanning 7 decades covered the walls. But it was what Commander Phillips found hidden behind a false panel in the bedroom wardrobe that made everyone's blood run cold. "Gentlemen," he called out, his voice unusually tight. "You need to see this." Sir James and the probate lawyer, Mr. Pemberton, rushed to the bedroom. Inside the hidden compartment was another jewelry box, this one larger and more elaborate than the first. But beside it sat something even more shocking, a detailed ledger book, its pages filled with meticulous handwriting. Margaret, who had insisted on joining the search despite protocol, carefully opened the ledger. The first entry was dated June 2, 1953, just days after the Queen's coronation. It read, "Diamond tiara, small setting loose. Removed for repair." Page after page documented a systematic removal of royal jewelry over a period of 20 years. Each entry included the date, the item taken, and a brief justification for its removal. Some pieces were allegedly taken for cleaning, others for repair, and some for inventory verification. "My God," whispered Mr. Pemberton. "She was stealing from the royal collection for 2 decades. Sir James studied the handwriting carefully. "This is incredibly detailed." She recorded everything. "Look at this entry from 1961. Emerald necklace, clasp damaged during state dinner. Taken for immediate repair to prevent embarrassment." Commander Phillips opened the second jewelry box with gloved hands. Inside were more royal pieces, rings, bracelets, a delicate diamond hairpin, and several loose gemstones that had clearly been removed from their original settings. Margaret turned to a page near the middle of the ledger and gasped. "Look at this entry from 1967. It says, 'Major inventory reorganization provides excellent opportunity. Removed 6 pieces during confusion. Assistant cataloger none the wiser.'" "Assistant cataloger," Sir James repeated slowly. "That suggests Ellen Morrison wasn't a low-level employee. She had supervisory authority over someone else." Commander Phillips was photographing each page of the ledger when he noticed something odd about the later entries. "The handwriting changes here," he said, pointing to entries from the 1970s. "This isn't the same person." Margaret examined the pages closely. "You're right. From 1973 onwards, the writing is different, smaller, more careful. Someone else continued Ellen's work. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just one person stealing royal jewelry over 20 years. It was a conspiracy that had continued even after Ellen Morrison apparently stopped her activities. Mr. Pemberton found more documents in a desk drawer. Bank statements showing regular deposits that were far too large for Ellen's modest pension, and correspondence with antique dealers and private collectors. Ellen had been selling some of the stolen jewelry while keeping the most precious pieces for herself. "Here's a letter from 1985, Sir James read aloud. "It's from someone signed only as M asking about the arrangement, and whether it's safe to make another withdrawal from what they call the private collection." Margaret felt sick. They had a code system. They weren't even calling it theft. To them, it was just managing a private collection. Commander Phillips discovered the most damning evidence in a small address book hidden beneath Ellen's jewelry box. It contained names, phone numbers, and cryptic notes about various palace employees spanning from the 1950s to the 1990s. One entry made everyone in the room go silent. R. Davies, night security, owes gambling debts. Cooperative since 1971. Another read, S. Thompson, cleaning staff, access to private quarters. Recruited 1978. This is a network, Sir James said grimly. Ellen Morrison was running a sophisticated operation using palace employees who had access to different areas. Margaret remembered something that made her heart race. Robert Davies. I remember him. He worked night security for over 30 years. He retired with honors in the late 1990s. And Sarah Thompson. She cleaned the Queen's private apartments. Commander Phillips was already on his phone, ordering background checks on every name in the address book. Half of these people are probably still alive. Some might even still be working at the palace. The probate lawyer looked overwhelmed. I had no idea. Ellen seemed like such a quiet, ordinary woman. Her neighbors described her as a sweet old lady who kept to herself. Margaret turned to the final pages of the ledger. The last entry, dated December 1993, was written in the second person's handwriting. Operation too risky now. New security measures make access difficult. Recommending suspension of activities. We'll maintain current holdings until safe disposal possible. They stopped, Sir James observed. Something in the early 1990s made them shut down the operation. Margaret knew what that something was. The palace implemented new inventory procedures in 1994 after some minor thefts from the staff quarters. Every piece of royal jewelry started being tracked with updated security tags and regular audits. Commander Phillips found one more item that chilled everyone. A photograph tucked into the back of the address book. It showed Ellen Morrison, much younger, standing beside a man in palace livery. On the back, someone had written E&H 1952. H, Margaret said softly. Another conspirator from the very beginning. Sir James closed the ledger carefully. We need to find out who H is, and we need to locate everyone else named in this book. As they prepared to leave Ellen Morrison's flat, Margaret couldn't help but feel they had discovered something that went far beyond simple theft. This was evidence of a decades-long conspiracy that had operated right under the noses of the royal family and their security teams. The most disturbing realization was that some of the people involved in this network might still be alive, possibly still connected to the palace and almost certainly still in possession of stolen royal treasures. Margaret looked around the modest flat one last time. Ellen Morrison had lived surrounded by evidence of her crimes for decades, apparently never fearing discovery. What kind of confidence did that require? And what did it suggest about how deep this conspiracy really went? The investigation was no longer just about recovering stolen jewelry. It was about uncovering a secret that could shake the very foundations of trust within the royal household. The secure conference room at Buckingham Palace had never felt more tense. Sir James spread Ellen Morrison's ledger across the polished table, while Commander Phillips presented his preliminary findings to a carefully selected group of senior palace officials. The situation is worse than we initially thought, Sir James began. Our investigation has revealed that at least 47 pieces of royal jewelry were systematically removed from the collection between 1953 and 1993. Margaret sat at the far end of the table, still officially retired but now serving as an unofficial consultant due to her historical knowledge of palace operations. She watched the faces around the table grow pale as the full scope of the theft became clear. 47 pieces? Asked the current head of the royal collection, Dr. Elizabeth Fairfax. How is that possible? Our inventories have always been meticulous. Commander Phillips pulled out a stack of documents. That's where it gets interesting. We've been comparing Ellen Morrison's ledger with the official palace records from the same time periods. In almost every case, the stolen items were officially recorded as being sent for cleaning, repair, or authentication by outside specialists, meaning someone was falsifying the official records, Sir James continued. The paperwork made it look like these items were legitimately removed from the collection. Margaret raised her hand slightly. I remember the procedures from my time. Any jewelry leaving the palace required authorization from at least 2 senior staff members. These thefts couldn't have happened without inside help at a very high level. Dr. Fairfax looked confused. But I've personally verified the collection multiple times over the years. How could 47 pieces be missing without anyone noticing? Commander Phillips opened another file. Because they were replaced, we found evidence that Ellen Morrison's network was using high-quality replicas to substitute for the stolen originals. Unless someone examined the pieces very closely with specialized equipment, the fakes would pass casual inspection. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. The thieves hadn't just stolen royal jewelry. They had orchestrated an elaborate deception that had fooled palace officials for decades. "We've identified the source of the replicas," Sir James said. "A jeweler in Hatton Garden named Henry Blackwood. According to our investigation, he created exact copies of royal pieces using detailed photographs and measurements provided by the thieves." Margaret felt her stomach drop. "Henry Blackwood, that must be the H from the photograph we found in Ellen's flat." "Exactly. We've located Mr. Blackwood's son, who inherited his father's business. He's been very cooperative. Apparently his father kept detailed records of all the replica work he did. He thought he was helping with insurance documentation for the palace." Commander Phillips produced a thick folder. Henry Blackwood created replicas of over 60 royal pieces between 1952 and 1994. Some were never used to replace stolen items, which suggests that thieves were planning to steal even more than they actually took. Dr. Fairfax looked devastated. "So the pieces in our collection that I've been caring for, some of them might be fakes?" "We're conducting discrete tests," Sir James confirmed, "using non-invasive techniques to verify the authenticity of pieces that match Ellen Morrison's ledger. So far, we've confirmed that 8 items currently in the collection are indeed replicas." Margaret had been dreading this moment, but she knew she had to ask the obvious question. "Have you told Her Majesty?" Sir James hesitated. "Not yet. We wanted to understand the full scope before briefing the Queen. But there's something else we need to discuss first." He opened Ellen Morrison's address book to a page he had bookmarked. "We've been investigating the people named in this book. Most of them are deceased, but 3 are still alive. 2 are living quietly in retirement, but the third," Commander Phillips took over. "The third person is still employed by the palace." The silence in the room was deafening. Margaret felt as if the air had been sucked out of the space. "Who?" Dr. Fairfax whispered. "Thomas Hartwell, head groundskeeper. He's worked at the palace for 38 years. According to Ellen's notes, he was recruited in 1985 to provide information about security patrols and staff schedules." Margaret knew Thomas Hartwell. He was a quiet, dependable man who had maintained the palace gardens with dedication for decades. The idea that he had been part of a theft ring seemed impossible. "We haven't approached him yet," Commander Phillips continued. "We wanted guidance on how to proceed. If we arrest him, word of the investigation might leak to the press." Sir James closed the address book. "There's also the question of the 2 retired conspirators. Sarah Thompson, the former cleaning lady, is living in Brighton. Robert Davies, the former security guard, is in a care home in Kent. Both are in their 80s. Margaret realized the terrible position they were all in. If this becomes public, it won't just be about the stolen jewelry. People will ask how such a large-scale conspiracy could operate undetected for 40 years. It will suggest that palace security and oversight were completely incompetent. Or worse, Dr. Fairfax added quietly, it might suggest that even more senior officials were involved." Commander Phillips nodded grimly. "We've found references in Ellen's notes to someone called the supervisor. This person apparently coordinated the whole operation and decided which pieces to target. We haven't identified who this was." Sir James stood up and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. "We have a choice to make. We can quietly recover as many stolen pieces as possible, update our security procedures, and keep this information confidential. Or we can pursue a full investigation that might expose the conspiracy, but could also severely damage the monarchy's reputation." Margaret thought about her 40 years of loyal service to the crown. "What does your oath of service tell you to do?" "My oath is to protect the crown," Sir James replied. "But I'm not sure whether that means protecting it from scandal or protecting it from ongoing deception." Dr. Fairfax spoke up. "There's another consideration. If Ellen Morrison's network sold stolen royal jewelry to private collectors, those pieces are still out there. They could surface at any time, possibly in very public ways. Commander Phillips checked his notes. We've already identified 3 pieces that were sold at international auctions over the past decade. The buyers had no idea they were purchasing stolen royal jewelry. Margaret realized that the conspiracy's legacy would continue to haunt the palace for years to come. Even if they recovered all the pieces they could find, the threat of other stolen jewelry appearing unexpectedly would always exist. We need to tell the Queen, she said finally. She has a right to know that her personal collection has been compromised, and she needs to make the decision about how to proceed. Sir James returned to his seat. Then we brief Her Majesty tomorrow morning, and we pray that whatever she decides, the monarchy can survive the consequences. As the meeting ended, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to cross a line from which there would be no return. The royal family was about to learn that their most trusted servants had been betraying them for nearly half a century. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth sat perfectly still in her private study as Sir James concluded his briefing. For several long minutes, the only sound was the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. Margaret, who had been summoned to provide historical context, watched the Queen's face for any reaction. 47 pieces, the Queen said finally, her voice steady but quiet. Including the Cambridge sapphire that belonged to my great-grandmother. Yes, Your Majesty, Sir James confirmed. We believe the Cambridge sapphire was among the first pieces taken, just days after your coronation. The Queen stood and walked to the window, her hands clasped behind her back. You're telling me that while I was learning to be queen, while I was trusting the people around me to help me serve my country, some of those same people were systematically stealing from the crown. Margaret felt the weight of the Queen's disappointment. Your Majesty, I don't believe anyone suspected what was happening. Ellen Morrison and her associates were very sophisticated in their methods. Sophisticated, yes, the Queen replied. But this wasn't just theft, was it? This was a betrayal of trust that continued for 4 decades. How many people do you estimate were involved? Commander Phillips consulted his notes. Based on the evidence we've gathered, we believe at least 12 palace employees participated directly in the conspiracy. There may have been others who helped unknowingly. The Queen returned to her desk and picked up Ellen Morrison's ledger, which Sir James had brought for her to examine. She read several entries in silence before closing it carefully. This woman, Ellen Morrison, what was her position in the palace? Deputy Keeper of the Royal Jewelry, Your Majesty, Sir James answered. She had access to the collection and authority to remove pieces for maintenance and cleaning. And I probably met her, the Queen mused. I probably shook her hand at staff events and thanked her for her service. Margaret remembered those staff gatherings well. Your Majesty always made a point of acknowledging the work of everyone in the household. The Queen sat back down and studied the faces around her. The question now is what we do with this information. You've presented me with several options, but I suspect you all have opinions about which path we should take. Sir James cleared his throat. Your Majesty, the legal department believes we have enough evidence to pursue criminal charges against the surviving conspirators. However, such action would inevitably become public. And the alternative? We quietly recover as many pieces as possible, implement enhanced security measures, and keep the matter confidential. The thieves who are still alive are elderly and no longer pose a threat. Commander Phillips added, We've already located 14 additional pieces through our investigation. Some were in Ellen Morrison's possession. Others were found in the homes of deceased conspirators' families. The Queen considered this. 14 more pieces. How many are still missing? We estimate that 21 pieces remain unaccounted for, Sir James replied. Some may have been sold to private collectors. Others might be hidden in locations we haven't discovered yet. Margaret knew she had to speak up. Your Majesty, there's something else to consider. The replica pieces in the current collection. Some of the jewelry you've been wearing for state occasions may not be authentic. For the first time during the meeting, the Queen looked genuinely shaken. Which pieces? Dr. Fairfax opened her file. We've confirmed that the state emerald necklace, the diamond butterfly brooch, and the pearls of Queen Victoria are all replicas. There may be others. The Queen touched her throat unconsciously, as if imagining the weight of false jewels around her neck. So when I've been representing the crown at state functions, I may have been wearing fake jewelry. The replicas are of extraordinary quality, Your Majesty, Commander Phillips offered. Even experienced jewelers might not detect the difference without close examination. But they're not real, the Queen said firmly. They don't carry the history, the authenticity, the connection to my predecessors that makes these pieces meaningful. Margaret understood completely. For the Queen, the royal jewelry wasn't just about monetary value or beauty. Each piece connected her to the long line of monarchs who had worn them before her. The Queen stood again and walked to a portrait of Queen Victoria on the wall. My great-great-grandmother's pearls. She wore them to important state occasions for 60 years. The idea that I've been wearing a fake version while the real pearls are God knows where. Sir James waited respectfully before speaking. Your Majesty, we need your guidance on how to proceed. Do we pursue full criminal prosecution, or do we handle this matter quietly? The Queen turned back to face them. There's a third option you haven't mentioned. We could inform the public about the theft and our efforts to recover the stolen pieces, but frame it as a historical investigation rather than a current scandal. Margaret saw the wisdom in this approach. That would allow for transparency while emphasizing that the conspiracy was discovered and stopped. It would also send a message, the Queen continued, that the monarchy takes seriously its responsibility to protect these historical artifacts for future generations. Commander Phillips looked concerned. Your Majesty, that approach carries significant risks. The press would certainly focus on the security failures and the fact that the thefts went undetected for so long. Yes, they would, the Queen agreed. But they would also see that we discovered the truth and took action to address it. That matters more to me than protecting the palace from embarrassment. Sir James made notes as the Queen continued. I want a full investigation of Thomas Hartwell and the other surviving conspirators. If they committed crimes, they should face justice regardless of their age. And I want every piece of royal jewelry currently in the collection verified as authentic. Yes, Your Majesty. I also want enhanced security protocols implemented immediately, and I want a complete review of how this conspiracy was able to operate undetected for so long. Margaret felt a surge of admiration for the Queen's decisive response. Even facing such a personal betrayal, she was focused on preventing future problems rather than just protecting the monarchy's image. Finally, the Queen said, looking directly at Margaret, I want Lady Whitmore to lead a historical review of all palace procedures from the 1950s onwards. Her knowledge of the period will be invaluable in understanding how these security gaps developed. Margaret felt honored but also daunted by the responsibility. I'll do whatever I can to help, Your Majesty. The Queen walked to her desk and picked up a pen. I'll be making a statement to the press within the week. The British people deserve to know that their royal heritage was compromised, but also that we've taken steps to protect it for the future. As the meeting concluded, Margaret realized that the Queen had chosen the most difficult but most honorable path forward. Rather than hiding the conspiracy, she would acknowledge it publicly and demonstrate that the monarchy could face its failures honestly. The investigation was about to become much more complicated, but Margaret felt that they were finally doing the right thing for both the crown and the country. 6 months after Margaret's discovery at the auction house, she stood in the restored royal jewelry room watching the Queen examine the Cambridge sapphire. The brooch had been professionally cleaned and was now displayed in a new secure case, alongside a detailed placard explaining its remarkable journey. It's beautiful, the Queen said softly, but it looks different somehow. Perhaps it's because I know what it's been through. Margaret nodded. 37 of the stolen pieces have been recovered, Your Majesty. The investigation exceeded everyone's expectations. The public announcement 6 months earlier had created exactly the media storm that Commander Phillips had predicted. Headlines screamed about the great royal jewelry, heist and decades of palace, deception. But something unexpected had happened in the weeks that followed. Instead of damaging the monarchy's reputation, the Queen's honest acknowledgement of the theft and her decisive action to address it had actually increased public support. People admired her transparency and her commitment to protecting Britain's royal heritage for future generations. The press coverage has been largely positive, Sir James observed, joining them in the jewelry room. The public seems to appreciate Your Majesty's openness about the situation. The investigation had uncovered even more than they had initially hoped. Thomas Hartwell, confronted with evidence from Ellen Morrison's address book, had confessed to his role in the conspiracy and provided information that led to the recovery of 12 additional pieces. Sarah Thompson and Robert Davies, the elderly retirees, had also admitted their involvement when presented with evidence. Both had kept several stolen items in their homes, apparently as insurance against financial hardship in their old age. What happened to them? The Queen asked. Hartwell received a suspended sentence due to his cooperation and his age, Sir James replied. Thompson and Davies were given community service. The judge felt that prosecution after so many years was more about justice than punishment. Margaret had spent months working with palace historians and security experts to understand how the conspiracy had operated undetected for so long. Their report had led to a complete overhaul of the palace's inventory and security procedures. New protocols are quite impressive, she told the Queen. Every piece of royal jewelry now has digital tracking, regular authentication checks, and multiple authorization requirements for any removal from the collection. Dr. Fairfax approached carrying a tablet computer. Your Majesty, we've completed the authentication of the entire collection. I'm pleased to report that only 11 pieces were replicas. We've replaced all of them with authentic items we recovered during the investigation. The Queen looked relieved. So when I wear the state emerald necklace to next week's state dinner, I'll know it's the same necklace worn by Queen Alexandra and Queen Mary. Exactly, Your Majesty. Margaret had been surprised by one unexpected outcome of the investigation. The publicity had prompted several private collectors to come forward with royal jewelry they had unknowingly purchased from Ellen Morrison's network over the years. Most had voluntarily returned the pieces to the palace. The American collector in New York was particularly gracious, Sir James noted. He returned 3 pieces and refused any compensation, saying he was honored to help restore Britain's royal heritage. Commander Phillips appeared in the doorway carrying a small velvet box. Your Majesty, we have one final recovery to report. He opened the box to reveal a delicate diamond tiara that sparkled under the room's lighting. This is the wedding tiara of Princess Louise. We thought it was lost forever, but it was discovered in a safety deposit box that Ellen Morrison had maintained under a false name. The Queen lifted the tiara carefully, examining its intricate design. I remember my aunt wearing this to my wedding. Ellen Morrison must have taken it shortly after that. Margaret felt a deep satisfaction watching the Queen hold the recovered tiara. The investigation had been difficult and sometimes painful, but they had restored not just stolen jewelry but the integrity of the royal collection itself. There's something else, Your Majesty, Sir James said. The Metropolitan Police have asked us to share our investigative methods with other museums and cultural institutions. Apparently, similar conspiracies may have operated at other locations. The Queen set down the tiara and looked around the jewelry room, now completely reorganized and secured with state-of-the-art technology. Good. If our experience can prevent other thefts, then something positive will have come from this situation. Margaret reflected on how much had changed since that autumn morning when she had wandered into the auction house. Her discovery had set in motion events that touched every aspect of palace operations and had even influenced how other institutions protected their collections. The real victory, she said to the Queen, isn't just that we recovered the stolen pieces. It's that we proved the monarchy could face a serious problem honestly and transparently. The Queen smiled, the first completely relaxed smile Margaret had seen from her throughout the entire investigation. Yes, I think that's right. We could have hidden this scandal, but instead we used it as an opportunity to do better. Sir James checked his watch. Your Majesty, the documentary crew will be here shortly to film the segment about the recovered jewelry for the BBC special. The Queen had agreed to participate in a documentary about the investigation, seeing it as another opportunity to educate the public about the importance of protecting cultural heritage. The program would air on the anniversary of Margaret's original discovery. Lady Whitmore, the Queen said, I hope you'll continue serving as our historical consultant. Your knowledge has been invaluable throughout this process. Margaret felt honored. Of course, Your Majesty. There's still work to be done reviewing historical records and ensuring that all the palace's collections are properly documented. As they prepared to leave the jewelry room, The Queen paused at the display case containing the Cambridge sapphire. "You know, I think I'll wear this to the next state occasion. It's been through quite an adventure, and it deserves to be seen." Margaret smiled, thinking about how the sapphire had traveled from the royal collection to Ellen Morrison's secret life, then to an auction house, to her cottage, and finally back home to the palace. In many ways, its journey reflected the monarchy's own ability to endure unexpected challenges and emerge stronger. The investigation had revealed uncomfortable truths about trust, security, and the vulnerability of even the most protected institutions. But it had also demonstrated that facing those truths honestly was always preferable to living with comfortable lies. As Margaret left the palace that evening, she reflected on the strange twist of fate that had led her to that auction house 6 months earlier. She had been looking for forgotten treasures and had instead uncovered one of the greatest conspiracies in royal history. But perhaps most importantly, she had helped ensure that the crown's most precious heirlooms would be properly protected for future generations. The Queen's decision to pursue truth over comfort had transformed a potential scandal into a story of institutional integrity and renewal. The royal jewelry would continue to sparkle at state occasions and represent centuries of British history, but now they would do so with the added security of knowing that their guardians had learned from past mistakes and would never again allow such treasures to disappear into the shadows of history.